You really believed those business shares were still yours to claim. After all this time, Tyler and I made sure the assets vanished long ago into the right accounts. Sign the transfer papers right now, or the board hears how you single-handedly tanked our biggest deals. Hi, my name is Brooke Danielle Lawson. I am 30 years old. That confrontation exploded in the glass-walled conference room of our firm's executive offices in the affluent coastal development outside Jacksonville, Florida. My boss, Gregory Harlan, stood at the head of the long table, his face flushed with that familiar mix of triumph and rage. My coworker, Tyler Brooks, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made my stomach twist. The two of them had cornered me after the morning strategy meeting, sliding the thick folder across the polished surface like they were handing me my own termination notice. I sat perfectly still, hands folded in my lap, observing the way my boss's jaw tightened, and my coworker's eyes darted toward the door every few seconds. They thought they had me. They thought the shares I had earned through years of late nights and client rescues were gone, diluted, and rerouted in secret board votes they had rigged months earlier. My boss's voice rose again sharper this time, laced with the kind of cold sarcasm that always masked his panic. Don't look so shocked, Brooke. You're the one who pushed for those aggressive expansions. Now, the books show gaps only you could have created. Sign it, or we make sure every investor knows exactly who the weak link was. My coworker chuckled low and unstable, the sound bouncing off the windows overlooking the coastal waterway. We've been carrying you for years. Those shares, they were never really yours. Once we restructured the LLC, assets don't just disappear unless someone makes them disappear. This is your last chance to walk away quietly. I didn't flinch. My mind was already 3 steps ahead, the way it always was when the ground started shifting beneath me. I had seen the signs, the missing client files, the sudden reallocations of funds, the way my coworker had started avoiding my direct questions about the quarterly reports. But I had stayed quiet, observant, composing myself while I quietly verified every transaction through my own secure channels. They had no idea I had moved the most valuable assets, key client contracts, intellectual property rights, and silent controlling interests into my personal LLC over a year ago, long before their manipulation began. The shares they were fighting over were essentially hollow shells now, but I let them believe they held the power. I reached for the folder, opened it slowly, and scanned the transfer agreement with the same calm precision I used on every financial audit. My boss's eyes narrowed, sensing something off in my lack of outburst. What, no tears? No dramatic resignation. Just sign the damn thing, Brooke. We have a board meeting in 2 hours, and my coworker and I need this cleaned up before the investors start asking questions. My coworker stood clapping my boss on the shoulder a little too hard, the gesture laced with the kind of forced camaraderie that screamed instability. Told you she'd fold. Those shares were never going to save her. They left the conference room together, voices already rising in excited whispers about the board presentation. I remained seated for a long moment, the signed paper now in their possession. What they didn't know, what they could never know yet, was that the transfer was meaningless. The real assets had been protected and moved long ago. But I needed them to believe they had won. I needed time to set the final pieces in motion. Later that afternoon, as I packed my desk under the watchful eye of security, my loyal assistant Lena Torres slipped into my office with a worried expression. Brooke, this is insane. I saw the board minutes from last quarter. My boss and my coworker pushed those share restructurings through without full disclosure. I tried to flag it, but HR shut me down. Her voice dropped. If you need anything, witness statements, copies of emails, I've got your back. I gave her a small, composed nod, grateful for the quiet support. Thank you, Lena. Just keep your head down for now. Things are about to get chaotic. She squeezed my shoulder before slipping out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The betrayal stung, but I refused to let it shake me. I had built this part of my life brick by brick. After my divorce, raising my son Aiden and my daughter Lily on my own while climbing the ranks here. My boss and my coworker had underestimated me for the last time. That evening, back in my townhouse in the same coastal executive community, I sat at the kitchen island reviewing the digital copies I had quietly maintained of every transaction. My son Aiden and my daughter Lily were already in bed, their laughter from earlier still echoing in my mind as a reminder of why I had to stay composed. My phone buzzed my coworker, texting me a final jab. Enjoy your freedom. The firm is better off without dead weight. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded key evidence to my external corporate attorney, Marcus Whitaker, with a single note. Begin the quiet review. They think they own everything. They own nothing. The next morning, the chaos truly began. My boss called an emergency all-hands meeting, announcing my voluntary departure in front of the entire team. My coworker stood beside him, nodding solemnly, as if he hadn't been the one feeding my boss the lies. I watched from the back row, observant as always, noting who met my eyes and who suddenly found the floor fascinating. Julian Hayes, a longtime colleague I had mentored, looked away when our gazes crossed. Carla Ruiz from HR shifted uncomfortably in her seat but said nothing. Old allies pulling away one by one. It was the secondary wound, the kind that made the whole situation feel unstable, like the ground could crack open at any moment. My boss's voice boomed through the room, laced with that vicious sarcasm he reserved for anyone who challenged his authority. Brooke's contributions were appreciated, but recent discrepancies in the share allocations required decisive action. We're moving forward stronger than ever. My coworker chimed in his tone, dripping with false concern. She'll land on her feet. Single moms always do right. The room murmured a few uncomfortable laughs, cutting through the tension. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I kept my posture straight, my expression neutral. Inside, the anger was sharp and focused. They were turning my departure into a public spectacle, using my personal life as ammunition. But I knew the truth: their manipulation had left holes wide enough for me to drive a truck through. I had the undelivered confession letter my coworker had drafted months ago, never sent but saved in a shared drive he thought was secure, detailing their plan to siphon assets. It had accidentally been left in a folder during one of their rushed meetings. Lena had forwarded it to me the night before. The mid-story twist I had been waiting for. As the meeting broke up, my boss cornered me near the elevators, his voice low and threatening. Don't even think about causing trouble, Brooke. We have the signed transfer. You're done. I met his eyes calmly. We'll see about that, my boss. He stormed off, but the unstable edge in his voice told me he was already feeling the first cracks. 2 days after the investor lunch, the first major crack appeared when my boss scheduled a high-stakes investor lunch at the firm's private club in the executive compound. My boss and my coworker planned to present the restructured company as stronger than ever. I wasn't invited, of course, but I had other plans. The investor lunch was supposed to be their victory lap. Instead, it became the moment the chaos truly spiraled out of control. I sat in my townhouse living room with my laptop open, my son Aiden and my daughter Lily playing quietly in the next room after school while the coastal breeze rattled the sliding doors. My boss stood at the podium in his crisp navy suit, my coworker right beside him, looking every bit. The confident, second in command, both of them grinning, like they had just closed the deal of the century. The room was packed with investors and senior team members from our tight-knit executive circle in the Jacksonville coastal development. My boss cleared his throat, his voice booming through the speakers with that unstable edge of forced authority. Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a new chapter for the firm. After some necessary internal adjustments, we've streamlined our share structure and secured our most valuable assets under stronger leadership. No more dead weight holding us back. My coworker jumped in seamlessly, his tone dripping with the kind of sarcastic bite that always masked his own shaky foundation. Exactly. Some people just couldn't adapt to the pace we needed. But don't worry, we've handled it quietly. The books are cleaner than ever, and the future looks bright for those who know how to play as a team. The crowd murmured in polite approval, a few heads nodding along, but I could see the subtle shifts even through the screen. Julian Hayes sat near the back with his arms crossed tightly, his eyes flicking toward the exit, like he wanted to bolt. Carla Ruiz from HR kept checking her phone under the table, her face pale. Old allies pulling away just as I had expected, the social circle starting to fracture under the weight of the rumors my boss and my coworker had been spreading all week. Then Victoria Lang, one of our key institutional investors, who had always valued my direct work on her portfolio, leaned over to whisper something to the person next to her. Her expression was tight, uncertain. I watched my boss gesture grandly to the projected slides touting the restructured shares and the supposed growth projections that conveniently left out the gaps I had quietly filled. My coworker chimed in again, his laugh a little too loud, a little too forced. We even had one former team member sign over her interests without a fight. Shows real character when someone knows when to step aside. The sarcasm landed like a jab, personal and vicious, the kind meant to remind everyone in the room exactly who they were talking about. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I stayed composed, my fingers steady on the keyboard as I pulled up the folder containing the undelivered confession letter my coworker had drafted months ago, the one that had accidentally been left behind in a shared drive during one of their rushed late-night sessions. Lena had forwarded it to me the night before. The mid-story twist hit right on cue. As my boss moved to the next slide, a junior associate in the back accidentally mirrored the wrong screen from the club system. Suddenly, instead of the polished financials, a scanned page from that confession letter flashed up for everyone to see, the text clear enough for the front rows to read. We rerouted the key client contracts and intellectual property into the shell accounts to dilute Lawson's shares without triggering compliance flags. Gregory approved the backdated board votes. Assets effectively vanished last quarter. The room went dead silent for a split second, then erupted into overlapping whispers and the scrape of chairs. My boss's face drained of color, his triumphant grin twisting into something raw and unstable. What the hell is that? Turn it off, technical glitch, everyone, just a glitch. My coworker lunged for the laptop at the podium, his movements jerky and panicked, knocking over a water glass in the process. This is sabotage. He snapped into the microphone, his voice cracking with that chaotic edge. Someone's feeding false information to undermine the transition. Brooke Lawson couldn't handle the changes, and now she's resorting to dirty tricks. We all know she was the one creating discrepancies in the first place. The psychological jab landed hard even through the screen, the kind of public humiliation designed to make me look like the unstable one. But I just sat there in my living room, observing the way Victoria Lang stood up abruptly, her expression shifting from uncertainty to outright disgust as she gathered her things. "This doesn't look like a glitch to me," she said loudly enough for the mic to catch. "I've seen enough. My firm will be reviewing our commitments immediately." The lunch descended into full chaos from there. Investors began murmuring about pulling funding phones, lighting up across the tables as people checked their own records. Julian Hayes slipped out the side door without a word, and Carla Ruiz from HR looked like she might actually be sick. Old allies weren't just pulling away anymore. The entire professional circle around my boss and my coworker was starting to abandon ship in real time, the social repercussions of their manipulation hitting faster than they could spin it. My boss tried to regain control, his voice rising into something almost unhinged. "This is exactly why we had to act. She's been undermining us from day one. Sign the papers, walk away quietly. And now she pulls this unbelievable." My coworker backed him up, his sarcasm turning sharper, more desperate. "She's always been too rigid, too focused on her little side deals. We did the firm a favor by forcing her out. Anyone still supporting her is next." I closed the laptop, the feed still showing the room fracturing, and let out a slow breath. The confession letter had done its job, accidentally left in plain sight just long enough to crack their facade wide open. But I knew this was only the beginning of the unraveling. Later that afternoon, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Richard Caldwell, the client who had called me earlier, left a voicemail saying he was moving his entire portfolio to a competitor until things settled. Another message from an unknown number, probably one of the investors, asking if I had documentation to back up what had flashed on screen. Lena texted me again. My boss just stormed back to the office, screaming about audits. My coworker looks like he's about to lose it. The board is calling an emergency session tomorrow. Stay ready. The pressure built like a storm over the coastal waterway, the kind that could shift from calm to destructive in minutes. That evening, as I helped my son Aiden and my daughter Lily with their homework at the kitchen table, my phone lit up with a call from Marcus Whitaker, my corporate attorney. "Brooke, the letter you sent me is dynamite. It's not just evidence of share manipulation. It shows premeditated asset rerouting. We can file for an injunction first thing tomorrow if you want to freeze their moves." His voice was steady, a quiet anchor in the chaos, but even he sounded cautious. This is going to get messy. Their social circle is already turning, but people like Victoria Lang are asking questions that could expose everything. I thanked him and hung up my mind, already turning over the next steps, with that same composed precision I had relied on for years. The betrayal felt raw, the way my boss and my coworker had tried to erase my contributions like they were nothing but. I refused to let the instability pull me under. Instead, I focused on the freedom I could feel building beneath the surface, the kind that came from knowing the assets had vanished long ago into my protected LLC safe from their grasp. Yet as I tucked my children into bed that night, reading them their favorite story to the sound of distant waves, a new text came through from an unknown number. It was short, vicious, and unmistakably from my coworker. You think that letter changes anything? We still have the signed transfer. Enjoy the fallout, because the board is about to hear the real story about how you tanked everything. The message left a heavy silence in the house, the kind that made the coastal night feel heavier than usual. I set the phone down, my expression calm on the outside, but inside the chaos was building towards something irreversible. The next morning brought the emergency board session, and I knew whatever happened there would force everything into the open. My boss had already started calling in favors, trying to rally what was left of his inner circle, but the abandonments were accelerating. Julian had officially distanced himself in a group email, and even Carla from HR had quietly forwarded internal memos to my attorney without a word of explanation. The social circle that had once propped up my boss and my coworker was fracturing faster than they could patch it. By midday, Marcus called again with an update that made the ground feel unsteady once more. Victoria Lang reached out directly. She wants a private meeting with you this afternoon. Says the lunch performance convinced her there's more to the story than they're telling. But my boss and my coworker are already spinning it as your personal vendetta. The tension hung there, a ticking clock on the unstable alliance they had built on lies. I agreed to the meeting, knowing it could either solidify my position or expose me to even more backlash if the board sided with them. As I drove toward the waterfront cafe where Victoria had suggested we meet, my mind raced with the quiet calculations that had kept me one step ahead so far. The assets were protected, the evidence was mounting, but the personal cost of this chaos was starting to show in the allies who had chosen silence over loyalty. Victoria was already waiting when I arrived, her posture rigid but her eyes sharp with the kind of quiet fury that mirrored my own resolve. "Brooke, I won't waste your time," she said as soon as I sat down. That letter wasn't a glitch. I've seen enough corporate games to recognize when someone's trying to bury the truth. "Tell me what really happened with those shares." I laid it out for her calmly, fact by fact, the manipulation, the backdated votes, the way my boss and my coworker had tried to make the assets vanish to cut me out completely. She listened without interrupting, but her expression darkened with each detail. "This changes everything. I'm pulling my firm's investment unless the board addresses this immediately. You have my support if you decide to fight it." Her words should have felt like a win, but the secondary wound of watching the entire professional network shift and fracture left an unstable ache. Old allies like Julian had already chosen self-preservation, and more were following. The social circle was abandoning ship, but the cost was isolation in the very community where I had built my career. As we wrapped up the meeting, my phone buzzed again this time with a direct message from my boss himself. "Boards, reviewing everything. Don't think this letter saves you. We still hold the signed transfer, and the narrative is ours to control." The threat hung there sharp and personal, the kind of psychological jab that revealed how unmoored he was becoming. I drove home through the executive streets lined with palm trees and gated compounds, the late afternoon light casting long shadows over the waterway. The chaos was far from over, and the next board decision could either force their hand or bury the truth once and for all. But I could already feel the quiet shift inside me, the recognition that no contact with their toxic world might be the only real freedom worth claiming, even if it meant losing pieces of the life I had worked so hard to build here. The board meeting the following morning turned the entire firm into a pressure cooker ready to explode. I arrived at the sleek glass building in the coastal executive compound with Marcus Whitaker at my side, the two of us walking into the main conference room like we belonged there, because legally, in every way that mattered, we did. My boss was already at the head of the table, his face tight with that unstable mix of rage and desperation, while my coworker paced near the windows, his usual smirk replaced by something jittery and raw. Sarah Klein, the board chair I had only met a handful of times in quarterly reviews, sat at the opposite end looking exhausted. Elena Vargas, another new board member who had quietly reached out to me through Marcus, after the investor lunch leak, watched everything with sharp, observant eyes. The room felt electric, the kind of unstable energy where one wrong word could send everything crashing down. My boss spotted me immediately and slammed his hand on the table, his voice cracking with sarcasm that barely hid the panic. What the hell is she doing here? This is an internal matter. Brooke signed the transfer papers. She has no standing left. My coworker jumped in right behind him, his tone vicious and personal, the psychological jabs flying, like he was unraveling in real time. She's the one who created the mess in the first place. We cleaned up her sloppy work, rerouted the shares to protect the firm, and now she's trying to play victim. The assets vanished because she couldn't keep up. Sign the final exit agreement and get out before we make this public. The room shifted uncomfortably. Victoria Lang was there in person, this time her arms crossed as she stared them down. Richard Caldwell had sent a representative who sat quietly taking notes. Julian Hayes and Carla Ruiz were both present but kept their eyes on the table, old allies who had already pulled away so completely it felt like they were strangers now. The secondary conflict of watching the professional circle fracture right in front of me hit harder than I expected. But I stayed composed, observing every twitch and glance. Marcus stepped forward, calmly sliding copies of the undelivered confession letter across the table, along with a digital trail showing the backdated votes and rerouted contracts. The assets didn't vanish because of Brooke's performance. They vanished because my boss and my coworker manipulated the books to dilute her controlling interests without disclosure. The signed transfer she gave you, it's meaningless. The real shares, client contracts, and intellectual property were moved into her protected LLC over a year ago, long before your scheme started. Past actions have finally caught up. My boss's face went pale, then flushed red as the chaotic realization hit him. He lunged for the papers, but Sarah Klein held up a hand, her voice cutting through the tension. Enough. We've reviewed the evidence overnight. This letter, accidentally left accessible in the shared drive, details everything. My boss, my coworker, you too, rerouted millions in assets without board approval. Elena Vargas leaned forward, her quiet voice carrying unexpected weight. And I've confirmed it independently. The firm's exposure is massive. We're recommending immediate removal of both of you pending a full audit. My coworker spun on my boss, the unstable alliance between them finally snapping in front of everyone. This is your fault. You pushed the backdated votes. You said the shares were easy to bury because she was distracted with her kids. I told you we needed more time. My boss rounded on him, his sarcasm turning into raw fury. Me. You're the one who drafted the confession letter in the first place, you idiot. You left it where anyone could find it. We were supposed to be a team, and now you're throwing me under the bus. The two of them tore into each other with vicious personal jabs that exposed every hidden resentment the side deals. The credit stealing the way they had used the firm's resources for private gains while pinning discrepancies on me. The social circle in the room watched in stunned silence as their empire collapsed in real time. Victoria Lang stood up first, gathering her things with a look of pure disgust. My firm is withdrawing all support effective immediately. This is fraud, plain and simple. Richard Caldwell's representative followed, nodding once, before leaving. Julian and Carla slipped out without a word, the abandonment complete. The professional network I had spent years building was severing ties, not just with me, but with the entire toxic core they represented. Sarah Klein called for order, but the damage was done. The board voted to freeze all further share movements and initiate an independent investigation. Marcus quietly informed them that my LLC held clear title to the protected assets, and any attempt to contest it would trigger immediate legal action. My boss and my coworker were escorted out by security, their voices still rising in mutual accusations down the hallway. The ironic twist hit me later that afternoon when Marcus reviewed the final documents. The transfer papers I had signed under duress, the ones they thought gave them everything, actually created a paper trail proving their intent to defraud. It backfired, completely strengthening my position and forcing the firm to negotiate a quiet settlement to avoid broader scandal. I walked away with full control of the assets I had safeguarded, plus a substantial compensation package that secured my son Aiden and my daughter Lily's future without any ongoing ties to the company. But the victory was partial, the loss irreversible. The coastal executive community I had called home for years turned cold overnight. Invitations dried up. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me in the waterfront shops. The social circle that had once felt like a support system abandoned ship entirely, not out of loyalty to my boss and my coworker, but out of self-preservation in a place where reputation was everything. I had exposed the heartless lie, but in doing so I severed the professional bonds that had defined my career here. No contact with that world became the only path forward. Lena Torres met me one last time in the parking lot as I cleared out my things for good. She hugged me tightly, her voice steady but emotional. I'm the one who made sure that confession letter was left accessible. I saw what they were doing to you and couldn't stay silent anymore. You deserved better. Her quiet role, revealed in that moment, felt like the final piece of the puzzle, an ally who had been working in the shadows all along. It brought a small, resilient smile to my face amid the chaos. I moved with the kids 2 months later to a quieter neighborhood farther inland, far from the gated compounds, and the unstable energy that had nearly swallowed me whole. The assets I had protected long ago funded a fresh start, a small consulting practice I built on my own terms, focused on the clients who had stuck by me like Victoria and Richard. There was no dramatic public downfall for my boss and my coworker beyond the quiet board ousting and the reputational stain that followed them out of the industry. They turned on each other completely, in the end, their partnership dissolving in lawsuits and blame. The social circle that once propped them up scattered, leaving them isolated in the very community they had tried to dominate. I felt no guilt walking away. The freedom that came with no contact was quieter than I expected, but it settled deep in my bones, like a calm after the storm. Choosing peace daily meant waking up without the weight of their manipulations, watching my son Aiden and my daughter Lily thrive without the shadow of office drama hanging over our home. The past had caught up exactly as it needed to, exposing the heartless lie forever and leaving me with something more valuable than any share structure, my own unshakable composure and the space to build something real. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had a boss or coworker manipulate what you built and try to erase you from the picture, I hope this reminds you that you can protect what's yours without losing yourself. Have you set boundaries with people who tried to take everything from you, even when it meant walking away from the world you knew? Let me know in the comments. I read everyone.